Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I was asked by Jeanette over at the Neal's Family Homestead to participate, I was tagged anyway, in this pie making collaboration. Well, since I really wanted to redo my chocolate pie recipe or my video so we could have better lighting and give you a better experience all the way around, I decided I'm going to go ahead and do this one. However, I am also going to give you some variations because this is a very easy recipe to take and turn into whatever kind of cream pie you want to make. So let's get started with the crust. Now, how you make your crust, everybody's going to have their own ideas of what is best. And I started making pie crust when I was 15 years old. I initially started off following the book exactly as was written, and then eventually just started realizing I didn't need the book anymore. I had a good idea of ratios just by the way the pie crust looks and feels as I'm working with it. So I won't have exact measurements for you on this, so I recommend you check out the other ladies in this collaboration. They may have exact measurements for you on the pie crust, and you can see if that might work better for you. But I'm hoping what I can do here is teach you how to get familiar with the pie crust, how it should look, how it should feel, so that you eventually just don't even have to follow a strict recipe when it comes to that. I'm going to use a half cup of my fresh milled flour. This is hard white wheat berries, emmer wheat berries, and spelt berries, but mostly I like to use the bulk of it being the hard white wheat because I think it just makes the best. It's just the best. It's the easiest to grind and all that too. And then with the other half, I'm going to use some organic white flour, unbleached. I always go with unbleached. I think it's going to be healthier than buying a bleached flour, and it works just as well as the bleached, and I don't see any difference really in the finished product as far as color goes. So, and besides, the the hard white wheat berries look very much similar to the unbleached flour anyway. Now, I do occasionally do just an entirely whole wheat crust. It is a little more delicate, so you have to be more careful when working with it. But doing a half and half blend makes it so that it's still easy to work with, but you're still getting some of those health benefits from the whole wheat flour that you've got in there. So a half and half seems to be a pretty good blend. I do this with a lot of different baked goods. So for this, you're going to need about a half teaspoon of salt. You don't want to go any more than that. It's just a single crust. So remember, you can double this if you're making more than one crust pie, or if you're making a 2 crust pie. And I just realized I forgot to get the ice water ready. So I just put some ice in there, and I'm going to add my rainwater there. This is our own filtered rainwater, but whatever good healthy water you've got, let that sit so it can get nice and cold, the water. You want the water really cold. This is one option as opposed to chilling the dough after you have it made and before you bake it. I've never chilled my dough and always had really good results just using the ice water. Okay, I prefer to use a big fork when I'm mixing my dough. I've actually never had a pastry cutter. My mom had one when I was, first started making pies at home, but when I was a young girl. But I found when I went out on my own, I never got around to buying a pastry cutter, and I found just using a big fork or even just a dinner fork works really well. Now, as far as your fat goes, there's so many different options. One thing I will recommend that you get away from, if you haven't already though, is your regular store-bought shortening. It's really, I don't even consider it a food product, and it's really not healthy for you at all. So 2 options that I recommend that I have found to make the best pie crust, or if you don't mind using pork products, then getting your hands on a good quality leaf lard is the best. It makes an excellent pie crust. I actually have this, a friend gave it to me from her own home-raised pigs, and they rendered it themselves, and I've had a couple of jars from her, and it makes a great pie crust. But those who are trying to stay away from pork products, or you are vegan or vegetarian even, then the next one I recommend is Tropical Traditions Palm Shortening. Yes, I know there's a lot of scare about palm shortening because of the whole sustainable thing, but look into Tropical Traditions. They're very sustainable. They have very strict standards about you know, protecting the environment and all that. And so I will link to this below, and they have a lot of information about this. This is the only brand of palm shortening I will ever buy. It's the only brand I have ever bought, and I only use it in two things. That's my biscuits and my pie crust, and so it lasts me a very long time. Yes, it's going to be more expensive than certain other kinds of fats, but it's totally flavorless, unlike lard that can sometimes have a bit of a piggy flavor to it, and coconut oil, which I don't think makes a very good pie crust. I've tried it. Coconut oil and butter can be good, healthy options, but I have found they tend to make the pie crust tough, unlike the palm shortening. So go ahead and check this out. I will link to it below and see what you think. Otherwise, I say go with your leaf lard. Don't go with the store-bought Armour lard unless it's your only other choice, because it is partially hydrogenated, which is not a good choice. So I don't use that at all. This is where it can get tricky on the amounts, because I don't even remember what actual measurements were for a fat. I just added in according to the amount of flour I have. So for something like this, I would start with no more than a 1/4 cup of the lard, and I don't even think that's a 1/4 cup right there. So you don't want to put too much in to start with, because if you put too much in, then you're going to have to increase the amount of flour you add. And then I start to mix it in, kind of cutting it in there, and I can get an idea as it breaks up into the flour if I'm going to need more, which I do think I'm going to, but my best way of knowing is to get my hands in there and feel it, because this is the way I like to do it best anyway. I only use the fork for the initial stirring and for the initial breaking up of the fat. So, and I'm right, I can tell by the feel it definitely needs more fat in it, because I am positive I didn't have a whole 1/4 cup. Which again, that's just a guess, because I never use measurements on the fat. I don't use measurements on the fat or on the water. It's all goes by feel. Well, this might be about right. Yes, I can tell this is going to be right there. So that probably was right at a 1/4 cup if I was to guess, but always start shy, start smaller to start with. But it's not going to hurt to have extra pie crust. If you find out your fat, it just seems it's just too much, then you can just add a little more flour, add a little pinch of salt, and just keep going from there. If you have extra pie crust dough, there's other things you can do with that. And notice I like to occasionally use the back of my hand to feel, because the back of your hand is it's more sensitive than the palms of your hands, so you can get a better idea what it feels like. So this feels perfect for the amount of fat. And then I just like to keep rolling around, so I've got that fat broken up as small as I can. And then every so often I'll squish it like that. This is about what you want it to look like when you squish it. You should be able to squish it and it holds together pretty good, but then when you go like that, you should be able to break it up. So you see how that is? And then I go like that and break it up, and that's how I know the fat ratio is correct. All right, so now here's where I'll be adding my ice water. And typically, like when I first started making pies and doing it by the book, it was a tablespoon at a time. I just pour a little bit in at a time. Like this, I'll pour a little bit in as I'm stirring it, and then just stir it in really well. And then I'll pour a little bit more in. Sometimes I'll even sprinkle it around the edges like this if they look really dry. Stir it some more, and then you're going to keep doing that until the dough starts to pull together on its own. And you'll be able to tell pretty well that you've got enough water. You can also at this point stick your hands in there and start to see if it squishes together. Don't squish it too much, because you don't want to knead the dough at all. Never ever knead your pie crust. You can use your fork and press it if it looks like it's going to hold together. I think it needs just a hair more water. I didn't need this much water. I'm just used to doing, when I make pies, I'm typically doing at least 2 pies at a time, and usually at least one of them is a 2-crust pie. But chocolate pie is always a winner, always a winner. Whenever I make several pies for anything, it's the chocolate pie that gets cleaned out first every time. It's incredibly rare that we ever have chocolate pie to bring home from any event because it always goes fast. Okay, so now that my crust is about where I want it there, we shall go ahead and push it together. And if you do this and you realize, you know what, it still isn't holding together as well as you want, then just crumble it back up again, and you can either put it back in your bowl. I'll usually just leave it on the counter and then sprinkle some more water in there. And then gently start to press it out. Whoop, let's get some flour down there. Obviously, we don't want it to, you know, to help keep it from sticking to the counter. And I like to use the heel of my hand to start pressing it out and keep smoothing those edges. Though I don't worry too much about the edges. Those are gonna, I don't worry about them being perfectly round because they're typically gonna get cut off anyway. And we'll just start rolling it out. Now when it comes to pie crust, I prefer to use a marble rolling pin. Now one thing that's really great about marble for pie crust, so that would be if you even have a marble countertop, that's going to help keep the pie crust a little more cold, just like the rolling pin itself, so that it's just going to give you a flakier crust and all that. And how I do it, this is another one of those things, is everybody has their own way. Some people like to roll it over the rolling pin and then put it in the pan. I've tried that. When I heard about people doing it, I'm like, no, not for me. I've always done it the same way, which was just a method I came up with on my own. I carefully pull on it while I use a nice flat stainless steel spatula to work it up all the way around, folding it in half. And then I do the same thing, folding it in quarters. Okay, make sure it's completely not stuck. And remember, even using half of the flour whole wheat is also going to make it more delicate. It's a little tougher than using the whole, you know, entirely whole wheat, but it's still going to have its challenges. So just keep that in mind if you choose to do that. Okay, so here's where you want to be really careful on a single crust pie. You do not want to stretch it at all. So as you work your way around, you lift it up and you push it down. Do not push it this way and stretch the pie crust, because that's going to definitely mean it will shrink for certain. Just try to get it nice and smooth all the way around. The simplest thing to do is just to make a decent looking edge is just to take your fork and press it around. That's just not my way. My way has always been to do the fluted edge like this, or the scalloped edge, I should say, by simply pinching the edge all the way around the crust like that. No matter what you do here, it is recommended that you, whether you use weights or another pie pan on top, I've tried that, didn't like it either, make sure you put a whole bunch of holes in the bottom and along the side edges of the pie crust. This is at least going to help prevent shrinkage and bubbling up. And I like to put quite a few, so it can be a little bit time consuming. And I don't care if the holes, if I overlap, because the more the better. Especially right here along these edges. Now, the weights, if you choose to use weights, one thing I recommend that I tried, of all the methods I've tried, I liked best was taking, Pastel has all his old glass marbles, and you can just take a piece of parchment paper and lay it, cut it to fit the inside of your pie pan, your crust there, and then put the marbles on top. I washed them up, obviously, of course, and then put them in there. And that's one really good way, if you happen to have some on hand, that's cheap, because pie weights are so expensive. But I'm just going to bake this as is, and one thing that's going to help with the shrinkage, prevent shrinkage, is going at a lower heat rather than going at 400 degrees for 15 minutes. Go maybe 325 or 350 or 375 tops and bake it for a longer period of time, like 20 to 25 minutes. Now, one of the reasons I don't like the weights is that it's just an extra step. You got to put that in there, you bake it for 10 to 15 minutes, you take the weights out, you bake it for another 10 to 15 minutes. So if you want to go through that hassle, then that's going to be the way to do it. I just don't worry about it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in my oven. I'm going to go ahead and set it. I like to use my toaster oven. I'm going to go ahead and set it at 350 degrees. I'm going to check it at 15 minutes just to see how it looks, and then possibly go for another 5-10 minutes tops, depending on how it looks. And then at that point, at the 15-minute mark, you might want to check and see how brown your edges are. Patrick likes his edges a little browner than most people might, so I won't be covering it with foil. But if you're real particular about keeping it very, very light, then you may want to cover the edges with foil at that point. All right, so while the crust is baking, let's go ahead and get started on the filling, the best part. So what we're going to start with is 2 cups of whole milk. And this milk still slightly frozen, so it's got little ice chips in it. But make sure it's whole milk. And I really like the Kirkland's organic milk, because it comes in boxes and we can buy a whole bunch when we make our trip into town. And then we freeze these up because they freeze beautifully. I don't have to worry about the plastic breaking down and you know, getting toxins into the milk. And then for salt, only a pinch. Okay, just a pinch. Don't put very much in there. And then for eggs, I'm going to use 3 eggs total. These are fresh chicken eggs, and yes, I know you should actually break them into a dish separately just in case you end up with one that's maybe been fertilized or whatever, but we don't have roosters, so I'm not worried about that. There's no way for those eggs to be fertilized. So 3 eggs. I've got my whisk here. I'm going to go ahead and whisk those into the milk. Whoops. And of course, me being me, I can't do anything without splashing stuff everywhere. A bigger, taller pan would help though. But yeah, you can see I'm mixing this directly into a stainless steel pot. That's what I'm going to be cooking this in. Actually, you know what? You want a little bit more salt than that. So we'll put in another pinch. I just realized, I got to looking at my recipe again and realized it was supposed to be a ½ teaspoon. So we'll just put in a couple more little pinches. You just don't want to get too much in there. You definitely don't want it to taste salty. Okay, now for sugar, I recommend on this just to go ahead and go with the organic cane sugar. I still go organic. I don't use the non-organic, like, you don't want to use beet sugar. That's all GMO. Always get cane sugar, and then try to at least get organic. Costco has the best price I've ever seen on your organic evaporated cane sugar. And for this, you're going to want a whole cup of sugar. You can go a little shy on that if you prefer it a little less sweet, but the way this ends up, it ends up not being all that sweet. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do 3/4 cup of that sugar. I'll need to refill that, so I'll leave it out. And it looks like I need to refill my coconut sugar too. And then 1/4 cup of the coconut sugar. If you choose to use coconut sugar, I recommend don't go any higher than 1/4 cup in your chocolate pie. It will give it kind of an odd flavor if you go too much on that. I find coconut sugar to work best in things that are spicy, you know, like apple butter and stuff like that. I love coconut sugar and those kind of things. And even in your apple pies, anything that you're going to use cinnamon and cloves and stuff like that in. So we'll do it that way. And using the coconut sugar also does cut back on the sweetness, because there's actually less sugar in 1/4 cup of coconut sugar than there is in 1/4 cup of your cane sugar, because it's so loaded with the minerals and other good stuff that's in there, which is one of the reasons I do still like to incorporate it into as much things as I can. Then one more thing you're going to need is up to a ½ cup of flour. Rice flour is a really good option for this. You can also use like a shy ½ cup of like tapioca starch or arrowroot powder. These will work good too, but since I already have my whole wheat flour right here, I'm just going to put that in there. So the combination of the eggs, and really you can just use 2 eggs. If they're larger eggs, use just 2. These eggs I'm using here are a little smaller, so I used 3 of them. But yeah, larger eggs just use 2, small eggs use 3. Here's your basic cream pie filling right here. You can use this to make coconut cream pie or just a vanilla cream pie. If you're going to do that though, I recommend you just don't put any of the coconut sugar in at all, because you can see that the color it makes it kind of a tan. You may not want it that color. But if you're going to do a coconut cream pie, what you're going to do is you're going to add 1 whole cup of coconut to this. And for chocolate, you're going to do a ½ cup of your organic cacao powder. So I will link to the cacao powder I use below. I buy this in bulk from Amazon through the Subscribe and Save program because it's the best price I personally have found so far, and I just do that. And we can go through quite a bit of this because it goes in my jet fueled latte blend, and it also it's also what I use to make our homemade chocolate and the homemade chocolate syrup. So a half cup of that, and if you got clumps, you might want to break those up. I saw a big one jump in there, but use your whisk and make sure you break that up. But you'll still be stirring it and cooking it, and you'll be able to break that up just fine. Now here's an option I'm thinking about doing is I'm still thinking about doing it with this one, is making it a chocolate coconut cream pie, because I've never actually done that. I keep meaning to do that, and I just keep it chocolate because my youngest son, he loves chocolate cream pie, but he doesn't like coconut. But since he's not here and they're on vacation, I think I'm going to go ahead and add that coconut in it. So I would think this would end up tasting a bit like a Mounds bar or Almond Joy without the almonds. So a whole cup of coconut if you're doing this. So what I'm going to do next is you want to set this, I'm going to put this on my wood stove. So you're going to want to cook it at about a low to medium heat. Just something where you don't want it to cook too quickly, but you can keep an eye on it. I can't tell you the exact heat because I typically am always using my wood stove for something like this. But as it warms up, this cacao, you'll be able to mix it in there better. It'll blend better as it cooks. Okay, well now I've got the crust still baking in the oven. I've got the filling on the wood stove cooking, and I'll go ahead and put a little video clip here so you can see it cooking there on the wood stove. You want to just keep checking it and stirring it. Once it gets to that point that it's really starting to cook, usually you want to let it cook for a total of 5 minutes. So you might want to time it either way. At that point, you do want to keep stirring it. Right now I can leave it because the fire is actually pretty cool right now, and it's just starting to heat up, so I'm not too concerned about it. But don't walk away from it and forget about it, because it will burn at the bottom. So if you have your heat too hot, especially if you cook it on a wood stove and you got kind of a hot fire going, remember you can also put things on a trivet if you're cooking on your wood stove. But again, on your conventional stove, I would say between maybe a medium-low heat would be a good option for that. Also, another thing that you can do during this time is you can go ahead and get your whipped cream made up, because you're going to be putting that on the top. So if you haven't seen my whipped cream video, how to make your own, I'll go ahead and link to it up here and down below, because I'm not going to do that in here. I'm not going to, since I have a whole video just on that. You also want to learn how to make your own homemade chocolate syrup as an option to put on top of the pie, and we'll get to that in a little bit. All right, well this is very thick. I let it cook just a little bit too long, but I'd rather have it very thick than have it be too runny. But even if it's a little runnier than this, when it chills, it's going to set up some more. So what you want to do at this point is after taking it off the heat, add about a tablespoon or so of vanilla extract. So I've got homemade vanilla extract right there. And then about a tablespoon, and this is optional, of butter, but it does make it richer and taste better. And then stir that in there real good. All right, and you can see the inside of I was actually watching the edges of the crust more than it was the inside. Surprisingly enough, the inside got darker than the outside. So actually I had very little shrinkage doing it that way, just putting all the holes and then baking it for a longer period of time at a lower heat. No weights needed. So I'm just going to go ahead and get all that filling in there. And the nice thing about this is you don't have to wait for the pie crust to cool off. You can just put it right in there. If you were doing like a instant kind of thing, you would have to wait for it to cool off. But since the filling is already hot, you're just going to put it in there. Now what I like to do to help speed up the time is I like to set it in the refrigerator and then let it finish setting up and cooling off in there, because you want it totally cooled off before you put your whipped topping on there. So I'll be back when that's ready. Okay, well the pie is all set up and cooled off enough that I can add the whipped topping. So I made this earlier. I'll just go ahead and dump it right on there. And I kept this in the refrigerator, the whipped topping, while I was waiting for the pie to get to a point where I could use this on here. And again, don't forget to check out the video. I'll link to it in the iCards in the corner there, as well as in the description box below if you want to know how to make your own whipped topping. It's a very easy process, and I do this by hand. I don't use an electric mixer. Okay, and then just spread that on there however you want. There's various different ways you can do it. I used to like to make little things like this. That's one way to do it. Now typically what I do is I just kind of spread it a little bit more, like doing frosting, I guess. And then for a topping, especially if you're going to make several pies, not only will this just give it a nice extra look, but having several cream pies, because I used to like to make a lot of cream pies, coconut and chocolate and lemon and banana and whatever, and then like to find a way to mark them so it'd be easy to tell what was what. And so you can just take your homemade chocolate syrup, which I also will have a video on this linked down below in the iCards, so you can see how to make it yourself. Again, using that cacao in there, and it's all organic. Just put as much on there as you want. There's various different ways you can do it. I like to do it like that so that then when I cut it, the lines of the knife will make a nice little pattern through that. I mean, it looks cool enough like that, but then once it's cut, it looks even more cool. So it's not like one of those, like, you know, that pie I did with all the hearts on top and things like that. Once you cut it, it's totally destroyed and you lose all the beauty of the pie. And that's still fun to do, but something like this, it can still look very cool when it's cut. Well, I'm just going to say another option you can do is if you want to make an almond joy pie, is you can take some almond slices, put them either in the mixture or sprinkle them on top of the filling before adding the whipped topping, and then put a few more just on top if you want for looks. And then with the coconut, if you're going to do it like I did here with a coconut chocolate cream pie, go ahead and sprinkle a little bit of coconut on top right there, just to add a little bit more to it. And again, if you're going to make just a coconut cream pie, then all you got to do is put a little coconut on there, and then you know what it is. And there we go. Our chocolate cream, or in this case, our chocolate coconut cream pie is all finished. And what I'll do right here is I'm going to put some pictures of the pie with it all cut so you can see how it looks, and then how it looks from the inside. And then it's going to be all ready for Mr. Rain for dessert. And I think he's going to be pretty happy with that. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to check out, I'll try to get the playlist down below of all the people involved in the collaboration. Thank you again to Jeanette for inviting me to be a part of it. Check out her channel and all the other channels involved. Hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll use this as a way to either make a chocolate cream or any other kind of cream pie you'd like to make for your various holiday dinners. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.